Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we dig into, stacks of research, articles, and ideas to pull out the really important stuff so you can be well-informed without getting totally buried.
Exactly. We do the digging so you get the gold.
And today, oh boy, we're jumping into something deep. It's fascinating, but also, frankly, a bit uncomfortable. We're talking about blind obedience.
Mm-hmm.
Our guide through this is largely the evolving thinking of Michael Aponte. He has this perspective that the lessons from, one of psychology's most famous or maybe infamous experiments, the Milgram experiment, they're not just history.
No, not at all. He argues they echo really powerfully today. You see it in cult-like groups. You saw it in how people responded during the pandemic, and definitely in our political divides right now.
Right. And that brings us to why this really matters, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Aponte really nails this core idea, something we probably all sense but don't often face head-on.
Yeah.
We humans are just so susceptible to obeying authority, even when, it clashes with our own morals, our common sense even.
It's a vulnerability.
A deep one. And understanding that vulnerability isn't just academic. I mean, it's crucial for navigating the world today. It's how you guard against manipulation, how you actually think critically, and how you protect your own autonomy, and frankly, ours collectively.
That's a pretty heavy starting point. Okay, So let's build this up from the foundation Aponte uses. The Milgram experiment itself. Stanley Milgram, 1961, Yale. Most people have heard of it, right? The shock experiment.
Yeah, it's pretty famous.
But Aponte wants us to look closer, beyond just the headline number, that 65% who went all the way. Milgram's goal was chilling, wasn't it? He was trying to get his head around atrocities like the Holocaust, asking that awful question, could it be that Eichmann and, millions of others were just following orders? That question still lands hard today.
It really does. And that led to the whole setup. For anyone who needs a quick refresher, you had volunteers brought in, told it was a study on memory. They got assigned the role of teacher.
And the learner was in on it, an actor.
Right, a Confederate. The teacher had to give shocks, supposedly for wrong answers. And the shocks got stronger each time. But here's the critical part. No actual shocks were delivered.
But the teachers didn't know that.
No. The learner's reactions, the grunts, the cries of pain, the pleas to stop, eventually just the silence, it was all an act, pre-recorded or performed. And all the while, you had this authority figure nearby, the experimenter in a lab coat.
Looking official.
Very official. Calmly telling the teacher they had to continue. Using these prods like, the experiment requires that you continue, or you have no other choice, you must go on.
And the results were just staggering.
Disturbing is the word, because it showed how ordinary people could be pushed to do extraordinary, even terrible things. Like you said, 65%, nearly two-thirds, went all the way to the maximum 450 volts.
Even though they were clearly distressed.
Oh, absolutely. Milgram documented it. People were sweating, trembling, stuttering, protesting. I mean, real anguish.
Right.
But they kept flipping the switches.
So what made them keep going? What conditions did Milgram find?
He pinned down a few key things. One, the authority figure had to seem legitimate. The Yale setting, the lab coat, the calm demeanor, it all added up. Two, responsibility felt diffused. The experimenter would say, I'm responsible, taking the burden off the teacher.
Okay. So it wasn't their fault.
They could tell themselves that, yeah.
Yeah.
And third, and this is crucial, the gradual escalation. Each shock was only slightly higher than the last. It wasn't a sudden jump to 450 volts.
Made each step easier to take.
Exactly. Yeah. Easier to justify internally. It's just a little more.
Okay, so Aponte takes these findings from the 60s and says, hold on, this isn't just about labs and Nazis. This is about us now. How does he make that leap? What are the mechanisms he points to?
Right. He argues these aren't just historical quirks. They reveal fundamental psychological mechanisms that are always operating. The first one he talks about is the agentic state.
Agentic state, okay.
It's a shift in thinking. You stop seeing yourself as acting autonomously with your own responsibility and start seeing yourself as an agent for someone else, an instrument carrying out their wishes.
So you basically hand over responsibility.
You do. Mentally, you transfer it to the authority figure.
Yeah.
And that's where you get that chilling phrase, I was just following orders. It lets people bypass their own moral compass because they feel they aren't the ones truly acting.
Wow. And how easily can we slip into that state, maybe without even noticing?
Frighteningly easily sometimes. Which leads to the second mechanism Aponte highlights, drawing right from Milgram. Gradual escalation. You might know it as the foot-in-the-door technique.
Get someone to agree to something small first.
Exactly. Small, seemingly harmless steps given by an authority can slowly lead you down a path to doing something extreme. It's psychologically much easier to justify a small increase in, say, the shop level than to make a huge leap.
It normalizes it over time.
Precisely, a slow normalization. It's a potent manipulation tool because each step feels manageable, almost logical, until suddenly you look back and think, how did I get here? We see this everywhere, not just in experiments, agreeing to small requests that lead to bigger ones.
And the third mechanism driving this?
That's perceived authority. Our brains are just, well, wired to respect authority. It's how societies function, largely. But the thing is, even the symbols of authority can trigger this obedience.
Like the lab coat?
The lab coat, a fancy title, impressive credentials, even just someone acting really confident. These symbols can command obedience. And Apont points out something really profound here. Challenging that authority doesn't just feel like disagreeing.
It feels strong.
Yeah, it can feel like a moral disobedience. Like you're breaking a fundamental rule, not just expressing a different opinion. That makes pushing back really, really hard for a lot of people.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. Aponte draws this direct line from Milgram's lab, straight to cults. That might sound like a big jump at first.
It might seem that way, but when Aponte lays it out, the parallels are undeniable. He argues cults basically weaponize the same psychological principles Milgram uncovered.
How so? What are the typical dynamics in a cult?
Well, think about it. You usually have a charismatic leader who becomes the ultimate unquestionable authority. Information is super tightly controlled. You only get the party line.
Right. Dissent is punished.
Often severely. Either emotionally, socially, sometimes even physically, creates a climate of fear. And followers are gradually indoctrinated. They internalize the cult's beliefs until it becomes their identity.
So questioning the cult means questioning yourself.
Exactly. And there's almost always this strong us versus them mentality. The outside world is painted as dangerous, corrupt, or ignorant. It binds the group together.
And Apont maps Milgram's conditions right onto this.
It's almost point for point. Remember Milgram's legitimate authority? In a cult, that's the charismatic leader. Milgram's gradual compliance, step-by-step shocks, that's the cult's slow indoctrination.
Okay, I see that.
The diffusion of responsibility Milgram found, that's like the groupthink in cults, where the leader's always right and individual responsibility dissolves into the group. The moral pressure, the teachers felt like it was wrong to stop the experiment. Cults explicitly frame obedience as virtue. Following the leader is the moral thing to do.
And the stress Milgram's participants felt.
Cults often use stress, confusion, sleep deprivation. These tactics are known to increase suggestibility, making people more open to the leader's influence. Aponte argues these aren't just coincidences. They're the same psychological levers being pulled.
That is quite a parallel. Now, Aponte takes this even further into very recent events. He makes this really provocative statement. The pandemic revealed not just a public health crisis, but a psychological experiment in mass obedience.
Yeah, that's a strong claim. And like you said earlier, we need to be clear. We're looking at the psychological mechanisms Aponte identifies, not debating the specific policies themselves. But his point is the conditions for obedience were strongly present.
Okay, so what did we see during the pandemic that fits this pattern?
Well, you had authorities, governments, health experts, media outlets issuing directives. Now, these were often presented as necessary for public safety, but they also frequently changed. Sometimes they even contradicted earlier advice.
Right, things were evolving quickly.
They were. But despite the confusion or inconsistencies, large segments of the public generally followed the mandates, mask rules, lockdowns, business closures, vaccine requirements. And what Aponte really highlights is the role of social pressure.
How so?
There was often significant censorship, sometimes subtle, sometimes overt, of dissenting voices or alternative perspectives. And shaming. Questioning the official narrative could quickly get you labeled as selfish, anti-science, or worse.
So it became socially risky to disagree.
Very risky. Professionally risky for some, too. This created an environment where exploring different viewpoints felt unsafe for many people.
And the obedience wasn't just driven by fear of the virus itself.
Aponte argues it was more complex. Yes, fear of illness and death was a huge factor, but so was the desire to be seen as morally good, as doing the right thing. Social pressure, professional pressure, and trust in those perceived authorities, the CDC, the WHO, the government scientists.
The white coats again, in a way.
In a way, yes.
Yeah.
The symbols of expertise. And the emotional framing was powerful. Disagreeing wasn't just having a different opinion. It was framed as being dangerous or uncaring. Compliance became the socially accepted norm, enforced not just by rules, but by peer pressure.
And what happens when contradictions pop up? When the advice changes or the data doesn't quite fit the narrative?
That's where Aponte brings in cognitive dissonance. It's psychologically uncomfortable to hold two conflicting ideas. I trust this authority, and this authority seems to be contradicting itself or getting things wrong.
So what did people do?
Often, the easier path, psychologically, is to dismiss the contradiction, to double down on the original belief. It feels safer to assume the authority must be right, maybe just privy to information you don't have, rather than confront the possibility that you put your trust in something flawed or that you complied with something unnecessary.
So you protect your belief system even against evidence.
It's a powerful self-protection mechanism. But the side effect is that it entrenches the obedience. It makes it even harder to question things later on. You become invested in having been right all along.
Okay, so from Milgram to cults to the pandemic, Aponte then casts his net even wider, looking at modern politics. And again, it's a pretty stark claim. Political tribes now mirror cult psychology.
It's definitely a statement designed to make you think.
Yeah.
And again, he's focusing on the behavioral patterns and the psychological mechanisms, not necessarily the specific political beliefs themselves.
So what parallels does he draw there?
You see echoes of the same dynamics. Think about blind loyalty, allegiance to a political figure or party that seems to override everything else, even logic or past statements. Policies might change, facts might contradict, but the loyalty remains.
Yeah, we see that.
Then there's the moral framing. Politics gets presented not just as policy choices, but as a battle between good and evil. Real Americans believe this. True progressives do that. Obedience to the party line becomes a moral imperative.
Disagreement isn't just wrong, it's immoral.
Exactly. And look at the excommunication of dissenters. People who step out of line within their own party get attacked, labeled rhinos, traitors, centrists, depending on the group. Cancel culture on various sides aims to punish ideological deviation.
Keeps everyone else in line.
It does. And finally, echo chambers. Social media algorithms, partisan news sources, even just socializing primarily with like-minded people, they all reinforce existing beliefs and shield us from challenging information. Just like the controlled information in a cult.
So Aponte's conclusion here is pretty bleak. He says, politics has become identity, and disobedience is no longer disagreement, it's heresy.
It's a powerful observation. When your political tribe is a core part of who you are, then someone challenging your tribe's beliefs feels like a personal attack, an attack on your identity.
So debate becomes impossible. It's just defending the faith.
It leans that way. Logic takes a backseat to identity protection. And that's incredibly dangerous for any society that relies on open discussion and compromise.
There's another layer Aponte adds here, right? The Dunning-Kruger effect. How does that fit in?
Ah, yes, the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's that cognitive bias where people who have limited knowledge or competence in a specific area tend to significantly overestimate how much they know or how good they are.
The less you know, the more you think you know.
Basically, yes. Aponte observed this playing out, for example, during the pandemic.
Yeah.
You had many people with very little background in virology or epidemiology or statistics becoming absolutely convinced they understood the complexities better than the actual experts.
Armchair experts.
Right. Holding very strong opinions based on, frankly, limited understanding. Now, combine that overconfidence with a tendency towards obedience to certain authorities.
Oh, I see where this is going. That's a dangerous mix.
It really is. You have people confidently obeying directives or spreading information without the ability to critically evaluate it. They think they understand, so they don't question. It mirrors the Milgram subjects deferring to the lab coat or cult members accepting doctrine without question, but with the added layer of misplaced self-confidence.
It blocks critical thinking because they already think they're thinking critically.
Precisely. And that makes them highly susceptible to manipulation while believing they're independent thinkers. It's kind of the opposite of our show's name, Thinking to Think. It's not thinking, but thinking you are.
Okay, this has been a lot.
Yeah.
And maybe a bit discouraging. But Aponte's work and this whole line of thinking, it's not just about pointing out the problem, is it? There's an antidote.
Absolutely. Aponte's message is ultimately one of empowerment. It's not about despairing over human nature. The key, he argues, the way we counter this drift towards blind obedience is critical thinking. And, crucially, it's something we can learn and practice.
So how do we do that? What are the practical steps?
First, it's about recognizing the triggers within ourselves. We need to become more aware of when feelings like fear or the pull of authority or that deep need to belong are influencing our judgment.
Become more self-aware.
Exactly. and ask ourselves that tough question Aponting implies. Okay, if I actually disagreed with this authority, what would I do? How would I react? Thinking about it before you're under pressure helps build resilience.
Makes sense. What else?
We need to consciously prioritize evidence over emotion and logic over loyalty. This is hard. It means actively seeking out different viewpoints, especially ones that make us uncomfortable or challenge our beliefs.
Get outside the echo chamber.
Yes. And scrutinize claims, no matter who makes them. Don't just accept something because it comes from your side or someone you admire. And maybe the hardest part, be willing to change your mind when the evidence warrants it.
That takes humility.
It really does. And Aponte makes another really important point. We need to reframe dissent. We need to normalize dissent as a form of care, not rebellion.
Dissent as care. Say more about that.
Thoughtful questioning, raising concerns, pointing out potential flaws when done constructively. It's not about attacking or undermining. It's about engagement. It's a sign of responsibility. It helps make ideas, policies, and groups stronger and more ethical. We should encourage that, not punish it.
That's a really powerful shift in perspective. Dissent isn't betrayal, it's responsible engagement.
Exactly.
So bringing this all together, Ponte's final thought really hits home, doesn't it? The Milgram experiment wasn't just about Nazis. It was about us, every one of us.
It lands hard because it's true. Those tendencies, Milgram revealed the deference to authority, the diffusion of responsibility, the power of gradual steps. They didn't vanish in the 1960s. They live inside all of us.
It's not about pointing fingers at specific groups, but recognizing these universal human patterns.
Right. Whether it's in a global crisis, a political movement, a workplace, even a family that we have to belong, to obey perceived authority, to feel like you're on the right side. It can sometimes lead us to override our own judgment, our own compassion, our own critical faculties.
It's a sobering reality check.
It is. But here's the hopeful part, the core message of thinking to think, really, informed by Aponte's work. Understanding these forces is the first step to mastering them.
Knowledge is power.
In this case, absolutely. When you recognize these psychological levers, the agentic state, the foot in the door, the power of perceived authority, cognitive dissonance, you gain the ability to consciously choose whether or not to be pulled by them. You can resist.
So this isn't a call to just reject all authority or become completely cynical.
No, not at all. Society needs structure. Expertise matters. It's not about anarchy. It's about conscious critical engagement. It's about recognizing the pressures, both internal and external, that push towards conformity and blind obedience.
And then choosing differently.
Choosing independent thought. Choosing moral courage. Choosing to take responsibility for your own beliefs and actions, even when it's uncomfortable.
A lot to think about there. We really encourage you, the listener, to mull over these ideas. How do they show up in your own life, in your workplace, your community, the news you consume?
It's an ongoing process, learning to think critically about obedience and authority.
Well, that's our deep dive for today. Thanks for joining us as we explored human obedience and the vital power of critical thought. This has been The Deep Dive.
Keep thinking.
We'll see you next time.